Hello guys, welcome to my new video, and today we're talking about some of the incredible patch changes for 9.1.5. They released the list, they released some additional changes, there's class changes, and in this video we'll be talking about basically anything related to healers. We'll be talking about the possible impact. Again, disclaimer, this is very early days for 9.1.5. Everything and anything can change, so if you're watching this video in the next month or so, there's possibly more things added, because the general consensus of the changes that I see here, Blizzard is catering towards its customer. Blizzard is kind of buffing the underperforming conduits, underperforming covenants in order to bring them more in line with the most popular choices, because guess what's happening in 9.1.5? You'll be able to freely swap between them. The balance has to be relatively close. So let's go and get started with the healer changes. So before we even go into the healer changes, we have to acknowledge the fact that they have removed the AoE cap. So all of a sudden, a lot of classes that had this limitation on like, hey, you can only hit 5 targets, it's being lifted. And this is another one of those things where Blizzard is listening to the community. It might be too late, I'm not sure, depending on how you feel. But if you're playing the game right now, if you're enjoying the game right now, this feature most likely is going to be very much welcome. So all of a sudden, a lot of classes, especially DKs who had a lot of limitations, that's being lifted. The main healer that's going to benefit from this, in my eyes, is going to be Druid, because swipe is being removed from the AoE cap. So all of a sudden, Frail Affinity Resto Druids might be a bit more of a thing, especially in Mythic Plus. And if you're pulling bigger trash packs, going into Kitty, swiping away, doing a good amount of damage, honestly can't wait to try it out, because that is something that I kind of grew up in Legion, playing my Resto Druid in BFA and things like that. So really welcome. So let's go to the Druid changes besides the AoE cap and things like that. So you can see here, Adaptive Swarm, which is your Necrolord ability, jump range has been increased to 50 yards. It was 25, so that's a big quality of life improvement, and will now jump to a friendly target if it expires on a friendly target and there are no valid hostile targets within 50 yards. So this is a overall buff to Adaptive Swarm. Adaptive Swarm or Necrolord in general is not a very popular option for Resto Druids, or Druids in particular, besides the fact maybe if you're doing PvP or if you're trying to do a certain amount of damage. But this is an indication of things to come. I think Blizzard is scared that especially Resto Druids are so prone towards one covenant, and that's Nightphase. So let's go to check out some of the covenant choices for healers, especially Druids. So this is your breakdown of the top Mythic Plus and top raid covenant choices based on some of the top performing classes or players. This is real player information, by the way. So you can see here that if you're a Resto Druid, if you're doing Mythic Plus, or if you're raiding, you're going to be picking Nightphase. And the main reason for that is that Nightphase is great in raids, and it's pretty good in Mythic Plus. So if you want to raid as a Restoration Druid, you'll want to pick Nightphase, and it's also going to be a decent choice in Mythic Plus situations. Now there is, you can see a sprinkling of players going with things like Necrolord, because Necrolord can be a very substantial DPS boost if you're doing Mythic Plus and trying to contribute towards healer DPS, because basically that is the meta right now. Best healer is determined by who can provide the most damage, because every single healer can meet healing checks, every single healer has some sort of utility, but the DPS disparity between healers is pretty massive, and Necrolord tries to bring that more in line. You also seen some Kyrian in really organized content like MDI, where your Kyrian ability is going to buff a DPS, and that DPS contribution for that player can be pretty significant. It's not going to show up on healing meters or damage meters, but it is going to be something that's going to help you in this really competitive environment. But it is very rare, and it is in an organized content where people know exactly what's going on, where they can play the class and the contribution is going to be good. So generally speaking, Nightphase is the king for Resto Druid, and they're buffing Necrolord. Do I think Necrolord is going to become the main thing? No, but I think it's an indication of things to come. So now let's go to the conduit changes and monks. Way of the Fae. Nightphase conduit effect increased by 100%. Keep in mind, this is purely a DPS increasing conduit, and this is not going to increase your healing if you're looking for HPS increases. Increases the initial damage of Phalanx Stomp by a certain amount per target hit by that damage, up to a maximum of a certain amount of additional damage. So you're looking at, again, something that is going to contribute towards your DPS. I am quite certain that at this point, a lot of the emphasis in terms of the monk community is towards Ventier. Ventier is becoming more and more popular in terms of having your Fallen Order cooldown reduction with your Ventier Covenant specific legendary has become a really kind of the hype right now. I know there's different damage patterns that it provides. It's been a bit of more continuous healing, and you can reduce the Ventier Covenant ability by a huge amount. I think you need a pretty big buffs for other covenants for monks to consider those covenants. So do I like the fact that they're going in the DPS route? Absolutely, because I think the biggest thing that differentiates Mistweaver monks in Mythic Plus content is their damage output. I think their healing, I don't think anyone in the game right now can argue the fact that Mistweavers are not the top HPS healers. They provide so much healing. Now, keeping your mana and managing your mana, especially if you have HEALER on, is another story. But if you can manage it properly, if you can get some innovates and like raid situations, your monk, especially Ventier, in a continuous kind of rot fight is going to be absolutely insane. And the data is there to back it up. If you look at the data for Sanctable Domination in terms of the most popular kind of legendary, you can see Sinister Teachings, which is a Ventier Covenant specific legendary for Mistweavers, is the most popular option in the raid situation, and in Mythic Plus, it is catching up quite fast. So Ventier is becoming more and more of a choice for Mistweaver monks. Do I think the fact that Blizzard is trying to cater towards the DPS options by this conduit buff, I think it's very interesting. Do I think people are going to swap from Ventier? I don't think so, but I think it is a cool indication of where Blizzard wants to bring Mistweavers. Increase their damage, because I think that's what they're lacking at this given point when compared to something like a Holy Paladin. And now let's go to Paladin and Holy Paladin. So Righteous Might, which is your Necrolord conduit, and this is a quite poor conduit if you look at it at this given point. Damage effect is increased by 400%. So it makes sense. It kind of shows you an indication of how bad it was before. And the healing effect reduced by 50%. Now, I'm assuming that the healing reduction is to account for the fact that the healing is based on how much damage you deal. So this is something that I want to try out in PTR. Unfortunately, on PTR, the changes are not live yet, so I cannot really see what an average geared Holy Paladin would heal for with this conduit. But I'm gonna go on this kind of sidetrack and talk about Necrolord Holy Paladin. So if you watch my videos from the start of beta, you probably know that I covered Vanquisher's Hammer for a long time. It's something that's been changed like 5 times. It's something that has seen potential but was never there in the Holy Paladin community because Ventier was just far too much popular. If you look at numbers right now, the most popular high-end covenant for Holy Paladins is Ventier, both in Mythic Plus and raids, with Kyrian having a much smaller slice. So this is why a lot of people didn't pick Necrolord, because they were scared it wasn't really as good. And I feel that if Blizzard is going to provide a bit more push towards Necrolord, I think it would be very interesting to try it out to see how it feels, because I genuinely feel that the playstyle of this is pretty interesting. Because you can see here I'm running Vanquisher's Hammer, so when I throw a hammer at your target, dealing a certain amount of damage and empowering your next World of Glory to automatically trigger Light of Dawn. And when you combine it with the Necrolord Covenant specific legendary, Vanquisher's Hammer gains 1 additional charge, and additional cast of World of Glory will automatically trigger Light of Dawn. So the playstyle is really kind of cool, because it used to cost Holy Power to use. Now it doesn't. So you can just select a target, use your hammer, and all of a sudden you have to generate 3 Holy Power to cast World of Glory. After you cast World of Glory, it's gonna cast Light of Dawn automatically. Now it has 2 charges because of my legendary. So again, I'm gonna go and generate 2 more Holy Power, and I'm gonna use World of Glory on this character, and it's gonna cast Light of Dawn. Pretty cool. And because I have 2 charges of Vanquisher's Hammer, I can pretty much have a pretty high uptime of this. And this creates a gameplay that requires me to use or incorporate, and again, with Divine Purpose procs, it becomes even more fun. It is a fun playstyle, which requires you to use this ability pretty much all the time in rotation, unlike other covenants. So this is why I really want this ability to become a more viable option. We'll see if Blizzard is going to push towards this, and if you can swap covenants quite easily in 9.1.5, if this becomes more viable, I'm definitely going to give it a go. Right now, it's just early days. And then we go to the Blessings of Seasons, which is the Night Fae ability, and the Night Fae ability was very controversial for Holy Paladins for a very long time. So Blessing of Spring now increases the healing done by 15%, was 10, and the healing received by 30% was 20%. And Blessing of Winter now reduces the hostile target's attack speed and movement speed by 5% per stack, was 3, and its damage has been increased by 40. So this is a very much warranted buff towards an ability that was pretty much unused by majority of Holy Paladins out there. They're very scared about using this because a lot of the times it just wasn't viable at all when you compare it to other Covenants in terms of the damage that they provide. But I do feel that Blizzard is very scared about this. Right now, I honestly have no idea how good this is going to be because I genuinely feel support abilities like these are pretty hard to measure, and most of the time they're somewhat underpowered. So I think with time and with more changes, we'll have to see how much further buffs it's going to receive, because you have to look at similar support abilities like Resto, Druid, Kyrian. That's kind of emerging a little bit right now. If you look at other Covenants that also, or abilities that support other players, in Mythic Plus they're becoming more and more popular because all of a sudden healer's job is a support. You're not there just to purely heal, you're here to provide DPS, and if you can't provide DPS, try and buff your other DPS specs or classes so they can deal more damage. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a case for Holy Paladin because Holy Paladin has Ventier, and Ventier, Ash and Hallow is just, you're a DPS class with this ability. Maybe with further buffs, maybe with further alterations, it'll be interesting to try this out, and I see where Blizzard is going with this, but I'm reluctant to look at this as a viable option because you have Ashen, and Ashen is just so strong in an organized environment. And now let's go to Priest, and honestly Priest received some of the most substantial changes here, especially Discipline. So Priest, Festering Transfusion, which is the Necrolord conduit, damage and healing has been increased by 100%. And this is something that I feel is going to impact Holy Priest a bit more, because honestly I feel Discipline Priest Covenant choice Kyrian is pretty much locked in. The fact that you can Boon of Descended or lower the cooldown of Boon of Descended by a substantial amount if you're running Kyrian, if you're running Mechanicos, if you're running the Kyrian specific legendary, it just is too strong in my opinion, both in Mythic Plus and in Raids. And in Raids you'll probably be using a different option of legendaries, but regardless, this buff to Necrolord is probably something that's aimed more of Holy Priest, because Holy Priest is not really tied into the Covenant. Besides the fact that if they want to play Discipline, they'll be tied into Discipline Covenant. Let's look at Holy changes. Divine Star Talent damage has been increased by 40%, and in the same way the Discipline, Divine Star Talent damage has been increased by 40%. So this is something that's probably going to be an interesting choice in Mythic Plus situations in order to do DPS. Now, we're again going to the whole healers have the DPS, healer DPS meta. This is just a fact. This is not me saying I enjoy healer DPS and I want everyone to every healer to DPS. This is just what separates healers right now, and this change is going to be interesting. We might see some Divine Star usage, I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is a right way to go by increasing or fixing some of the gaps in Priest Arsenal, especially in Holy Priest, where the damage that they provide might be a little bit lackluster. Discipline, Contrition Talent, healing increased by 15%. This is something that people have talked about in terms of how to optimize it. The fact that you need to heal with Penance in order to get a good use out of it can be very awkward, because you might get sniped, especially if you're in a raid situation, if you have a lot of these single target healers in your raid. The value of Contrition can drop unless you can really optimize your Penance healing. So I think this is not a big change, and I think this might not bring Contrition in line in that talent row. But again, these are early days, and I feel like Blizzard is consistently trying to balance talents for Discipline, because Discipline is such a hard spec to really oversee. And probably the most interesting choice for me in here is Shadow Covenant. Healing increased by 10%, mana cost reduced by 10%, and the duration lowered to 7 seconds from 9 seconds. And I've tried this out in the PTR. Unfortunately, the PTR does not have the changes, so it's still 9 seconds, but I think it's an interesting talent. I always thought Shadow Covenant was one of the most interesting talents because it requires good play. It locks you out from casting holy abilities, and all of a sudden it can actually be a detriment to your healing capabilities if you use it at wrong times. And I always thought a high skill ceiling meant a more fun gameplay. I don't think this talent is going to be all that popular at this given point because the mana consumption is still relatively high, but who knows, maybe there's going to be some interesting gameplay emerging, or maybe Blizzard is going to buff it even further. Like right now, if you use Shadow Covenant, you're not able to cast holy spells, and it's going to heal, and it's going to also increase the damage and healing of your shadow spells by 25%. Again, this is an old tooltip, keep that in mind, because the PTR is not updated yet. So if you cast your Shadow Covenant, there's only a limited amount of abilities you can cast. You can cast your Mind Blast, you can cast your things like Schism, you can cast, again, can also go Mind Seer. Keep in mind, Mind Seer, Atonement Transfer, like majority of the AoE abilities for Discipline Priest, it only procs Atonement from the first target hit. So in AoE situations, it doesn't have as big of an atonement healing impact as you might think. I think Shadow Covenant playstyle is very interesting, and I honestly want Blizzard to make it a viable option, something that people might use, because the combination of using Shadow Covenant, the combination of making sure you have Mind Blast, making sure maybe your Schism, your Mind Seer, and then like if you really fall into trouble, Shadowman is still something you can cast. So I genuinely believe this talent build could be, or this talent could provide a lot more interesting gameplay. So overall, I don't feel that a lot of the Discipline Priest changes here are as impactful as they should be. I think they could use a bit more of a buff, but I think the direction here is clear. Blizzard wants you to have more options in terms of the talent choices for Discipline Priest, which is honestly only a good thing in my eyes. And the last healer change is going to be towards Shaman, and honestly this is a bit of a weird one. Elysian Dirge. So this is your Carrion Conduit. If you are running Carrion, you probably are if your Resto Shaman is doing Mythic Plus content, because it is the hype. Let's say an average 6k overall DPS at the end of a dungeon if you're playing relatively offensively. So Carrion, Resto Shaman, is somewhat comparable to Holy Paladin in poke situations in terms of the damage. And this conduit, Vesper Totem, is 40% more effective against the targets nearest to it, is pretty much the lock-in choice for Resto Shaman. So what's happening? Its effect is being increased by 50%. So in terms of the top Mythic Plus covenants for Resto Shaman, you can see the shift has happened. 70% of Resto Shamans who are doing Mythic Plus content or high-end Mythic Plus content are Carrion. It is just the way to go. It is insanely powerful. And you can see in raiding, 79% of them are Necrolords. And this is where I fall into. I am a Necrolord Resto Shaman in raid content. And when I finish raid progression, I'm going to go into Carrion. And what are some of the more popular conduit options for Carrion Resto Shaman right now? If you look at, again, sub creation, this is real player information. You can see here Mythic Plus Restoration Shaman, the most popular option. Raging Vesper Totem by a significant amount. We're talking like Carrion is taken over. And if you look at some of the most popular conduit options, you'll see that they're all going to be including Elysian Dirge. And you can see it's basically everywhere. So the buff to this is gonna make Carrion even a more powerhouse Mythic Plus build. But this is a good thing in my opinion, because you will be able to swap covenants easier in 9.1.5, or much easier in 9.1.5. So all of a sudden you'll just swap to Carrion Mythic Plus and you're going to be running this Vesper Totem DPS build, and you'll swap to something else when you go to raiding. Probably, honestly, Necrolord, I think Night Fae, I think Ventier are all very solid options in raiding situations. So get ready if you're playing Resto Shaman to swap covenants based on Mythic Plus or raid, because there is a huge disparity between the top covenants in those situations. So in terms of patch 9.1.5 changes, I think they're incredibly amazing. I think Blizzard has listened to all of the feedback, but I do think that there is kind of like break the glass in case of emergency type of thing happening here, and all of a sudden all of the community suggestions have been met. And I think Blizzard knew all along, because things might not be going that well and they want to keep the remaining players playing. Because I'm not sure if these changes are going to be big enough to bring, you know, the players who are left the game or who are thinking about coming back. I'm not sure if this is going to be big enough. In my opinion, I'm extremely excited about this patch. I think 9.1.5 in terms of the healer changes, in terms of the AoE cap, in terms of the Legion Mythic Plus. Honestly, some insane things are happening and I'm really happy. But you also have to keep in mind it's early 9.1.5 and I expect more changes in terms of class balance. But it's something that I predicted. I don't think Blizzard is going to be doing a lot of the nerfing of classes, because they want to keep the customer base happy. They want everyone to be positive about the next patch, and nerfing classes will be viewed as something that's negative and my class is being destroyed and etc. and things like that. So I expect more buffs than nerfs for this patch, which is something different, because Blizzard usually just nerfs a couple of classes and just leaves it there. I think the next patch, I think 9.1.5 is going to have a lot of positive changes and buffs to underperforming classes and underperforming covenants, but that's a prediction for the future. Let me know how you feel about this video, and I'll see you in my next guide.